Behind the velvet curtains of British cinema's golden age lay a harrowing secret. While the world worshipped their beauty, powerful producers treated iconic actresses not as stars, but as currency to be traded amongst the elite. Today, we expose the heartbreaking reality of 10 legends trapped in a gilded cage of exploitation. Before we unveil these tragic stories, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Do you believe the industry has truly changed since these dark days? Diana Dawes. She was celebrated as the British Marilyn Monroe, a platinum blonde phenomenon from Swindon who captivated the nation with her pout, her curves, and her undeniable comedic talent. But behind the blinding glitz of her 500-pound mink coats and the constant flashbulbs of the paparazzi, Diana Dawes was living a claustrophobic nightmare orchestrated by the very man who was sworn to protect her. Her first husband, Dennis Hamilton, was not merely her manager, he was a controlling architect of her misery who viewed Diana not as a wife or a person, but as a lucrative asset to be leased out to the highest bidder to satisfy his own greed and dark voyeuristic tendencies. Hamilton was a man of deeply disturbing tastes, obsessed with control and manipulation. In their lavish riverside mansion in Maidenhead, which became a hub for the British elite, he installed a complex system of surveillance that would make a spy jealous. He placed two-way mirrors in the guest bedrooms and hid cameras throughout the property, turning their marital home into a private theater for his own twisted amusement. It was within these walls that the bright young star was subjected to a life of psychological conditioning. Hamilton would frequently host raucous, alcohol-fueled parties attended by the absolute upper crust of British society, including powerful film producers, wealthy American investors, and even notorious underworld figures like the Cray twins. It was at these gatherings that the true nature of Diana's duties became heartbreakingly clear. Hamilton would allegedly encourage, and often coerce through fear and intimidation, Diana to entertain these powerful men in the private quarters while he watched from behind the glass or filmed the encounters. He effectively used her breathtaking beauty as a bargaining chip to secure loans, film financing, and social leverage. If a tycoon needed convincing to invest in a project, access to Britain's most desirable woman was the sweetener used to seal the deal. Diana, who was still young and terrified of Hamilton's violent temper and connections to dangerous men, felt she had absolutely no choice but to comply with his demands. The psychological toll was immense. To the public, she was a symbol of liberation and confidence, driving pink Cadillacs and living the dream. In reality, she was a prisoner in a gilded cage, forced to trade her dignity to satisfy the whims of a man who saw her only as a commodity. Hamilton stripped her of her autonomy entirely. He managed her finances with an iron fist, and years later, Diana revealed that he had siphoned off nearly every penny she had earned during the peak of her fame, hiding it in secret accounts she could not access. When he finally passed away, he left her in significant debt, having spent her fortune on his own lavish lifestyle and gambling. The industry whispered about what went on at Hamilton's parties, but no one intervened. The producers and executives who attended were complicit, happy to take advantage of the situation for their own pleasure while ignoring the exploitation of the woman providing it. Diana Dawes was a talented actress capable of great depth, yet for the most crucial years of her career, she was reduced to a trophy to be passed around, her worth measured only by her ability to please the men who controlled the purse strings of British cinema. Her story remains a chilling reminder of how the studio system often turned a blind eye to abuse when it suited the powers that be. Christine Keeler. If there is a single narrative that perfectly encapsulates the collision of high society glamour and the dark, exploitative underbelly of the British establishment, it is the tragic tale of Christine Keeler. In the summer of 1963, she became the face of the Profumo affair, a scandal so seismic that it would eventually help topple the Conservative government. However, long before the tabloids branded her a threat to national security, Christine was simply a teenage girl from a broken home, seeking escape in the neon-lit alleyways of London's Soho. She found herself swept into the orbit of Stephen Ward, a society osteopath with a charming smile and a black book filled with the names of aristocrats, politicians, and spies. Ward was not a typical agent, nor was he a trafficker in the traditional street-level sense. He was a facilitator, a man who curated a collection of beautiful, impressionable young women to decorate his dinner parties and impress his wealthy friends. Ward groomed Christine with terrifying precision, transforming her from a rough-around-the-edges showgirl into a sophisticated companion capable of mingling with lords and members of parliament. He introduced her to the elite world of Cliveden House, the grand estate of Lord Astor, where the rich and powerful gathered for weekends of debauchery away from the prying eyes of the public. It was here, by the infamous swimming pool, that she was essentially served on a silver platter to John Profumo, the Secretary of State for War. To the men who frequented these gatherings, Christine was a delightful plaything, a good time girl to be shared for their collective amusement. Ward treated her as a social currency. Lending her company to powerful men ensured his own position within their circle remained secure. He orchestrated her movements, deciding who she would speak to and who she would go home with. The depth of the exploitation became clear when it was revealed that, at the very same time Ward was encouraging her to entertain the British War Minister, he was also pushing her into the arms of Yevgeny Ivanov, a Soviet naval attaché and spy. Ward was effectively running a high-stakes geopolitical game, using Christine's body as the playing board. She was passed between the representative of the British Crown and the agent of the Kremlin, often within days of each other. To Ward and his associates, she was merely a honey trap, a tool to gather whispers and secrets, or simply a means to curry favor with powerful figures on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Christine was young, naive, and largely unaware of the dangerous web being spun around her until it was too late. When the scandal inevitably broke, the very men who had enjoyed her company and praised her beauty immediately turned on her with vicious cruelty. The establishment closed ranks to protect its own. Profumo was disgraced, but remained a wealthy man protected by his class, while Ward, facing trial for living off immoral earnings, tragically took his own life before the verdict could be delivered. This left Christine to face the wrath of the British public and the press alone. She was labeled a woman of loose morals, a homewrecker, and a liar. The media tore her reputation to shreds, ignoring the fact that she had been manipulated by a man 20 years her senior and used by the most powerful men in the country. For the rest of her life, Christine Keeler could not escape the shadow of being the woman who brought down a government. In reality, she was a victim of a ruthless class system that viewed working-class women as disposable commodities. She spent decades living in relative poverty and isolation, changing her name and hiding from the press, while the men involved in her exploitation largely retreated to their country estates to live out their days in comfort. Her story is not one of a femme fatale, but of a girl who was chewed up by the machinery of the elite and spat out the moment she became inconvenient. She was the ultimate scapegoat for the moral failings of men who believed their power gave them the right to use others without consequence. Mary Millington. In the gritty, neon-soaked landscape of 1970s London, one face dominated the newsstands and cinema hoardings more than any other. Mary Millington was the undisputed queen of the British adult film industry, a woman whose girl-next-door smile and lack of inhibition made her a national sensation. She starred in Come Play With Me, which became the longest-running film in British cinema history at the time. Yet, beneath the veneer of liberation and the cheeky humor of her films, Mary's life was a tragic example of how the entertainment industry chews up and spits out its brightest stars. She was not merely an actress, she was a product, a living, breathing brand created and controlled by David Sullivan, a publisher who built a multi-million-pound empire squarely on the back of her image. While Sullivan ascended to the ranks of the super-rich, eventually becoming a newspaper proprietor and football club owner, Mary was thrust into a relentless, punishing schedule that would have broken even the strongest spirit. She was marketed not just as a screen siren, but as a fantasy that could be accessed. The lines between her on-screen persona and her private reality were deliberately blurred by her management to sell more magazines and tickets. Mary was expected to be available to the public eye constantly, attending openings, posing for endless shoots, and mingling with the patrons of her shops. She was the golden goose, and her handlers were determined to extract every single golden egg, regardless of the toll it took on her mental health. However, the exploitation of Mary Millington went far deeper than just grueling work schedules. She became a target for the darker forces within the British establishment. During the 1970s, the Metropolitan Police's Obscene Publication Squad, known colloquially as the Dirty Squad, was notoriously corrupt. Instead of enforcing the law, many officers operated a protection racket, demanding bribes from pornographers and club owners. Mary found herself in the crosshairs of these powerful men. Her home and her business were raided incessantly, her property was seized, and she was threatened with prison under obscure and outdated laws. It was widely whispered in Soho that the harassment was not just about money. Allegations surfaced that corrupt officials and men in positions of power used the threat of legal action to coerce Mary and her peers into providing intimate company. She was treated as a resource to be used by those with a badge or a title. Mary was trapped in a vice. On one side, a management team that viewed her body as a commodity for profit, and on the other, a corrupt legal system that viewed her as a moral stain to be squeezed for bribes and favors. The pressure was unimaginable. She lived in a state of constant paranoia, terrified that she would lose everything she had worked for. To cope with the anxiety and the exhaustion of being the happiest girl in the world while living a nightmare, Mary developed a dependency on illicit substances and prescription medication. Her behavior became erratic. She began shoplifting small items, a cry for help from a woman who felt she had lost control over her own life. She was surrounded by people, yet she was profoundly alone. The men who profited from her films and the men who persecuted her were two sides of the same coin, figures of authority who refused to see her humanity. In August 1979, at the age of just 33, the pressure finally became too much to bear. Mary wrote a heartbreaking note to her mother and the British public, detailing the relentless harassment she had faced from the police and the despair she felt at being unable to escape the trap she was in. She tragically took her own life in her Surrey home. Her death was a national scandal, yet the machinery that destroyed her kept turning. The films kept selling, the magazines stayed on the shelves, and the men who had used her as a pawn in their power games continued their careers. Mary Millington was the face of a decade, but she died a victim of a ruthless industry that valued her silhouette far more than her soul. Mandy Rice Davies. While history often remembers her merely as the co-star in the Profumo scandal, the vivacious blonde who famously quipped from the witness box, Mandy Rice Davies was far more than a supporting character in a political drama. Born in the quiet suburbs of Solihull, she was a spirited teenager who grew up dreaming of a life far bigger than the Midlands could offer. By the tender age of 16, she had moved to London, initially finding work as a model for a department store. However, the bright lights of the capital in the swinging 60s hid a predatory network of older, wealthy men who viewed fresh-faced provincial girls as the ultimate accessory. Mandy was quickly identified as a prime candidate for this world. She was beautiful, witty, and dangerously naive about the intentions of the powerful figures who began to circle her. It was not long before she was swept up by Peter Rachman, a man whose name would become synonymous with exploitation. Rachman was not a film producer or a politician, but a notorious slum landlord who made a fortune racketeering in Notting Hill. He was a man of immense, shady wealth and terrifying influence. When he set his sights on the young Mandy, he did not woo her with romance. He acquired her. He installed her in a flat, showered her with expensive gifts, and effectively kept her as a bird in a gilded cage. To the outside world, she was living a life of luxury, driven around in a Jaguar and draped in furs. But in reality, she was the latest in a long line of protégés Rachman collected. He treated his mistresses like cars, driving them for a while, showing them off to his associates to display his status, and then trading them in for a newer model when he grew bored. Mandy was trapped in a transactional relationship where her security depended entirely on his whim. The exploitation deepened when Rachman introduced her to his wider circle, including the osteopath Stephen Ward. It was through this network that Mandy was passed from the gritty underworld of London landlords to the polished drawing rooms of the aristocracy. She was expected to be the life and soul of the party, a decorative object that could hold a conversation and pour a drink for lords and viscounts. At the infamous parties hosted by Ward and Lord Astor, the expectation was clear. The girls were there to facilitate the enjoyment of the men. Mandy later recounted how these pillars of the establishment, men with wives and titles, would pursue her with a sense of entitlement that was breathtaking. They assumed that because she was part of the set, she was public property. Her defining moment came during the trial of Stephen Ward in 1963. When told that Lord Astor denied having an affair with her, or even knowing her well, she delivered the immortal line, "Well, he would, wouldn't he?" The court erupted in laughter, but beneath the humor was a scathing indictment of the British class system. In 5 words, she exposed the hypocrisy of the elite men who used young women like her for their pleasure and then discarded them like rubbish when the spotlight hit. They expected her to be silent, to be ashamed, and to protect their reputations. By speaking out, she refused to play the role of the silent victim, even though the press branded her a tart and a moral danger to society. After the trial, the stigma was so intense that Mandy found it impossible to build a normal life in Britain. The Rhys Davies name was poison to respectable society, yet a fascination for the tabloids. She was forced to leverage her notoriety, singing in cabarets and opening nightclubs, effectively selling the only thing the public would buy from her, her scandalous past. She eventually moved to Israel to escape the suffocating judgment of the British public. While she later became a successful businesswoman and found happiness, her youth was stolen by a carousel of older men, from landlords to peers, who saw a 16-year-old girl not as a person to be nurtured, but as a prize to be passed around until the shine wore off. Her resilience was remarkable, but it was forged in the fire of profound exploitation. Fiona Richmond. In the haze of 1970s London, where the rigid morality of the past was colliding with a new wave of permissiveness, Fiona Richmond emerged as the ultimate symbol of British glamour. To the public, she was the epitome of confidence, a former air hostess who had conquered the West End and the tabloids with her daring performances and her trademark Jaguar E-Type with the number plate FU2. However, the woman born simply as Julia Rosamond Harrison was, in many ways, the greatest creation of Paul Raymond, the notorious King of Soho. Raymond was a property tycoon and publisher who owned the review bars and theatres that defined London's nightlife. He did not just hire Julia, he completely rebranded her, crafting the persona of Fiona Richmond to be the living, breathing figurehead of his adult entertainment empire. She was his star, his lover, and his most valuable marketing tool, all rolled into one. Raymond's control over Fiona was absolute. He understood that controversy sold tickets, and he used her to generate endless column inches. She was thrust onto the stage of the Whitehall Theatre in productions that pushed the boundaries of legality and decency, often finding herself at the center of police raids and legal battles that were orchestrated to boost Raymond's profile rather than her own artistic career. While Raymond counted the takings in his office, Fiona was the one standing in the dock or facing the flashbulbs, absorbing the moral outrage of the nation. She was living a life that was scripted for her, blurring the lines between the character she played on stage and the woman she was in private. The press treated her as public property, a caricature of availability that stripped her of any real depth or privacy. The most disturbing aspect of her time in the spotlight was how she was allegedly used as a diplomatic and social lubricant for the ultra-elite. It was widely whispered in the corridors of power that her company was offered to visiting dignitaries and royals. The most persistent and credible of these stories involves the Shah of Iran. During a winter visit to St. Moritz, it is said that Fiona was flown out specifically to entertain the Shah, one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time. Whether this was a consensual tryst or a calculated business move by her management to curry favor with international royalty remains a subject of debate, but the optics were undeniable. She was treated not as an actress with a craft, but as a luxury gift to be presented to a powerful man who could open doors for Raymond's business interests. Even her famous relationships seemed to serve a dual purpose. Her highly publicized affair with a member of the chaotic comedic group Monty Python was splashed across the papers, keeping her name, and by extension Raymond's theaters, in the public eye. She was the queen of the confessional interview, where she would detail her adventurous private life to magazines owned by the very man who managed her. It was a closed loop of exploitation where her intimacy was the product being sold on the newsstand. Fiona was paraded at film premieres and embassy parties, always the most glamorous woman in the room, yet always tethered to the expectations of the men who profited from her image. By the time the decade ended, the Fiona Richmond persona had consumed Julia Harrison almost entirely. She eventually walked away from the industry, finding solace in a quieter life in the countryside and becoming a hotelier far removed from the neon lights of Soho. But her story remains a testament to the era's transactional nature. She was a woman of intelligence and wit who was reduced to a two-dimensional fantasy used by a tycoon to build a billion-pound fortune while she bore the brunt of the stigma. She was the face of the sexual revolution, but for the men in the boardroom, she was simply the most profitable asset on the balance sheet. Vicky Hodge. If there was ever a woman who embodied the reckless hedonism of the British aristocracy in the 1970s, it was Vicky Hodge. Born the daughter of a baronet and raised in the plush comfort of Surrey, she was a blue-blooded debutante who should have married a duke. Instead, she became a model and actress, starring in risque films like The Stud and Confessions of a Sex Maniac. But her filmography pales in comparison to her notoriety as the ultimate trophy for the men who ruled the headlines. Vicky was the quintessential it girl, a beauty who moved effortlessly between the worlds of high society, Hollywood, and the London underworld. However, her fluidity came at a price. She was often treated not as a partner, but as a passport to a better class of party. Her most infamous relationship was with John Bindon, a rugged Cockney actor and notorious gangster with a violent temper and a terrifying reputation. Bindon was a man who collected connections, and Vicky was his golden ticket. He used her aristocratic lineage to gain entry to places a Fulham Hardman would never normally be welcome, from the VIP rooms of Chelsea nightclubs to the royal retreat of Mustique. It was a transactional dynamic where Vicky provided the legitimacy and the glamour, while Bindon provided the danger and the protection. She was effectively passed into his world, paraded before his criminal associates as a prize that proved his status. He would allegedly show her off to his friends, treating her like a prized racehorse rather than a lover. The exploitation of Vicky's status reached its peak when she became involved with Prince Andrew in the early 1980s. The press went into a frenzy: the baronet's daughter, the gangster's ex, and the queen's son. She was painted as the corrupting influence, an older woman leading the young prince astray. In reality, she was a convenient distraction, a fun, good-time girl for a prince on leave. When the relationship became a PR liability for the palace, the drawbridge was pulled up. Vicky was cast out into the cold, left to deal with the paparazzi swarm alone. She was branded a kiss-and-tell merchant for selling her story, yet for the men involved, she was simply a chapter in their memoirs. Vicky was a woman who seemingly had it all: beauty, money, and class, yet she found herself trapped in a cycle of being used by powerful men. Bindon used her for social climbing, the prince used her for rebellion, and the film industry used her for her nudity. She was the face of the jet set, photographed on yachts and in convertibles, but behind the smile was a woman who was constantly looking for a man who wanted her, not just the headlines she could provide. Her life was a whirlwind of champagne and flashbulbs, but it left her with a reputation she could never quite shake: that of a luxury accessory passed between the powerful men of her era. Imogen Hassel. In the lexicon of British cinema, few nicknames were as degrading or as reductive as the Countess of Cleavage. This was the moniker bestowed upon Imogen Hassel, a woman of immense warmth and genuine artistic ambition who was ruthlessly pigeonholed by an industry obsessed with her physical attributes. Born in Woking to a creative family, Imogen was not merely a beauty queen stumbling onto a set. She was a classically trained actress who had honed her craft at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. She joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, dreaming of playing complex, tragic heroines on the prestigious stages of the West End. However, the film producers of the swinging 60s and the cynical 70s had no interest in her ability to deliver a soliloquy. They saw only her long legs, her cascading dark hair, and her willingness to appear in various states of undress. To the studio executives and the casting directors, Imogen was a commodity to be exploited for the glamour quota of a film. She was cast in decorative roles in The Avengers, The Saint, and the Carry On franchise, where her lines were few, but her camera time was maximized. The tragedy of her career was the relentless friction between who she was and what she was forced to be. She was dragged onto the talk show circuit, not to discuss her craft, but to be ogled by hosts and audiences alike. Behind the scenes, the pressure to maintain her status as a premier party girl was suffocating. Imogen was a fixture on the London social scene, a world where invitations were currency. She was expected to attend the openings of nightclubs, the launches of products, and the private dinners of tycoons, always with a smile, always looking perfect. It was in these elite circles that the exploitation was most insidious. Imogen was often treated as a trophy to be won, a beautiful object to be displayed on the arm of a powerful man to boost his ego. She had a string of high-profile relationships, but they were often characterized by a lack of genuine connection. She was sought after for her image, not her soul. The men she dated, actors, musicians, and industry moguls, enjoyed the prestige of being seen with the Countess, but few seemed to care for the fragile woman beneath the persona. She spoke openly about her desire for a child and a stable family life, but the industry demanded she remain the eternal, available starlet. The constant rejection of her serious acting attempts wore her down. When she auditioned for serious roles, she was often laughed out of the room or told she was too pretty to be taken seriously. By the late 1970s, the Dolly Bird era was fading, and Imogen found herself cast adrift. The phone stopped ringing with offers for even the decorative roles she had come to loathe. She felt used up, a vintage model that had gone out of style. The vibrant social life that once sustained her now felt empty and predatory. She traveled to Hollywood in a desperate bid to reinvent herself, but she found the casting couch culture there just as brutal as in London. She returned to Britain disheartened, facing financial difficulties and a deep sense of isolation. The press, who had built her up as a sex symbol, now turned on her, mocking her failed relationships and her fading career with cruel indifference. In November 1980, at the tragically young age of 38, Imogen was found dead in her Wimbledon home. She had taken her own life, leaving behind a note that spoke of her loneliness. Her death was a damning indictment of a system that harvested youth and beauty with industrial efficiency. Imogen Hassall was a woman of talent and intelligence who was chewed up by the machinery of fame, forced to play a caricature of herself until she could no longer bear the weight of the mask. She remains a haunting reminder that the fun and freedom of the era often came at a terrible cost to the women who were expected to embody it. Kathy Kirby. She was known to the nation as the Golden Girl of Pop, the highest-paid female singer in Britain during the mid-60s, instantly recognizable by her signature glossy red lips and platinum blonde bombshell aesthetic. Kathy Kirby possessed a voice of incredible power and a smile that could light up the London Palladium, yet her reality was a far cry from the glittering image she projected on television screens every Saturday night. Her life was defined, dominated, and ultimately destroyed by one man, Bert Ambrose. A legendary bandleader from the 1930s, Ambrose was more than 40 years her senior when he discovered the teenage Kathy. He became her manager, her lover, and her jailer, constructing a relationship that modern psychologists would undoubtedly classify as deeply coercive and abusive. Ambrose viewed Kathy not as a partner or a protégé, but as his personal creation and his property. He dictated every aspect of her existence, from the songs she sang to the dresses she wore and even the food she ate to maintain her figure. While she earned the equivalent of £5 million in today's money during her peak, Ambrose controlled the purse strings entirely. Kathy was given a paltry allowance, while Ambrose used her immense earnings to fund his own lavish lifestyle and, more destructively, his catastrophic gambling addiction. He was a man who lived on the edge, frequenting the high-stakes tables of Mayfair clubs where fortunes were won and lost in a single spin of the wheel. It was in these smoky, exclusive gambling dens that the true depth of Kathy's exploitation was whispered about. Ambrose was perpetually in debt to dangerous men, gangsters and loan sharks who did not take kindly to unpaid "I owe us." It has been alleged by those within the industry that Ambrose used Kathy as a form of currency to appease these creditors. Her presence at a table, her company at dinner, or her friendship with a wealthy high roller was the collateral Ambrose put up to buy himself time. She was the dazzling distraction, the celebrity trophy that Ambrose could offer to the men he owed money to, effectively trading her dignity to cover his losses. Kathy, isolated from her family and entirely dependent on Ambrose for her sense of self-worth, had little power to refuse. The psychological toll of this existence was devastating. Ambrose was terrified that Kathy would leave him for a younger man or that she would discover the true state of her finances, so he kept her in a state of suspended adolescence. He manipulated her into believing she could not function without him, fostering a dependency that would prove fatal to her career. When other men showed interest, Ambrose's jealousy was suffocating. Yet when it suited his financial needs, he was seemingly willing to facilitate her interaction with the very men who held his markers. She was a bird in a gilded cage, singing for the public while her keeper sold tickets to her private suffering. When Ambrose died in 1971, Kathy's world collapsed. She had been a star for a decade, yet she found herself penniless and homeless, with no understanding of how to navigate the real world. The industry that had fawned over her when she was Ambrose's golden girl now ignored her. She spiraled into mental health struggles and reclusiveness, living out her remaining years in relative obscurity and poverty. The woman who had once commanded the highest fees in show business died relying on state benefits, a tragic victim of a man who saw her talent as nothing more than a bankroll for his vices. Her story is a stark reminder of how the power dynamics of the 60s allowed older men to prey on young talent with absolute impunity. Carol White. In the mid-60s, the British press hailed her as the Battersea Bardot, a working-class girl with platinum hair and eyes that held a universe of sorrow. Carol White was not just a starlet. She was the face of a new kind of raw, gritty realism, delivering a performance in the television play Kathy Come Home that actually changed the law on homelessness. She possessed a vulnerability that made the nation want to protect her, yet the industry she worked in seemed determined to do the exact opposite. Carol was a woman of immense, raw talent, but she was also fragile, and the sharks of show business smelled blood in the water from the moment she arrived in Hollywood. She was lured away from the serious drama of London to the sun-drenched hills of Los Angeles, promised a life of glamour and international stardom. What she found instead was a predatory playground where she was treated as little more than a decorative accessory for the most powerful men in entertainment. Her arrival in America marked the beginning of her descent. She fell into the orbit of the fading but still powerful Rat Pack era, becoming entangled with Frank Sinatra and his circle. To the public, it looked like a fairy tale romance. In reality, it was a profound imbalance of power. Sinatra and his associates were men who were used to snapping their fingers and having a beautiful woman appear. Carol, searching for love and validation, became a mascot for their high-stakes lifestyle. She was expected to be available, to look stunning at dinner parties, and to laugh at their jokes, effectively serving as a status symbol for men old enough to be her father. She later spoke of the loneliness she felt in those palatial mansions, surrounded by people who loved the idea of her, but had no interest in the human being behind the image. The exploitation of Carol White was not just sexual, it was emotional and professional. Producers in Hollywood saw her not as the serious actress Ken Loach had directed, but as a British dolly bird to be cast in forgettable roles that required her to shed her clothes rather than display her acting range. She was pushed into a cycle of party girl behavior to maintain her connections. The industry encouraged her indulgences. If she was intoxicated, she was compliant, and a compliant starlet was easier to manage. She was passed from one high-profile relationship to another, from Sinatra to Oliver Reed to Richard Burton, each man taking a piece of her spirit. She was a trophy to be displayed on the arm, a validation of their virility. But when the party ended, she was often left to deal with her demons alone. Her vulnerability was monetized by the tabloids and the studios. When her mental health began to fracture under the pressure, instead of offering support, the industry labeled her difficult and unreliable. The very men who had poured her drinks and encouraged her excesses turned their backs when the shine wore off. She was no longer the next big thing, she was a liability. The tragedy of Carol White is that she was a woman of substance who was treated like a disposable camera, used for a few bright moments and then discarded. By the time she reached her 30s, the phone had stopped ringing. She returned to England not as a conquering hero, but as a casualty of the transatlantic fame machine. In her later years, she struggled with poverty and addiction, living a life that eerily mirrored the tragic character she had played in Kathy Come Home. She died at the shockingly young age of 48, her liver failing after years of self-medication. Carol White was a victim of a system that commodified beauty and chewed up vulnerability. She wanted to be respected as an artist, but the powerful men of the era only wanted her to be a plaything. Her legacy is a somber lesson in how the entertainment industry can take a diamond and crush it into dust, leaving the world to wonder what might have been if she had only been protected instead of preyed upon. Marianne Faithfull. If there is a single figure who embodies the dizzying heights and the crushing lows of the swinging 60s, it is Marianne Faithfull. Born into the Austro-Hungarian nobility, she was the convent-educated girl with the face of an angel and a voice that dripped with melancholic wisdom. However, from the moment she was discovered at a party by the Rolling Stones manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, in 1964, she was treated less as a talent to be nurtured and more as a pristine image to be corrupted for public consumption. Oldham famously stated that he saw an angel with big and proceeded to market her sexuality with a cynicism that was shocking even for the time. She was 18, impressionable, and thrust into a world of predatory men who viewed her aristocratic background as a challenge, a purity to be taken and tarnished. Her relationship with Mick Jagger placed her at the very epicenter of the Cultural Revolution, yet she was rarely afforded the respect of a partner. To the press and the public, and indeed to many in the rock and roll aristocracy, she was the ultimate accessory. She was the beautiful blonde draped over the arm of the rebellious frontman, a muse who inspired songs like Sympathy for the Devil and You Can't Always Get What You Want, yet received no credit and no royalties. She was passed around the inner circle of the band, treated as a shared mascot for their hedonistic lifestyle. While the men were celebrated as anti-establishment heroes for their excesses, Marianne was quietly absorbing the damage. She was expected to keep up with their consumption of illicit substances, to look perfect in the morning, and to never complain, a silent doll in a chaotic dollhouse. The defining moment of her exploitation came in 1967 during the infamous Redlands drug bust at Keith Richards' country estate. When the police raided the property, they found Marianne wearing nothing but a fur rug, having just stepped out of a bath. The media frenzy that followed was one of the most shameful episodes in British journalistic history. While the male rock stars were portrayed as dangerous outlaws, a badge of honor in the rock world, Marianne was singled out for total moral annihilation. The tabloids invented a salacious and entirely false rumor involving a chocolate bar to humiliate her, painting her as a woman of depraved appetites. She became the scapegoat for the nation's moral panic. The establishment could not destroy the Rolling Stones, so they destroyed their girl instead. Following the scandal, the disparity in their fates was heartbreaking. As the 60s bled into the 70s, the Rolling Stones became tax exiles, multimillionaires, and eventually knights of the realm, protected by their immense wealth and corporate machinery. Marianne, on the other hand, was cast out. She lost custody of her son, a blow that shattered her and spiraled into a severe dependency on Class A substances. The woman who had once been the princess of the London scene was found living on the streets of Soho, sleeping on a wall behind a building, ravaged by addiction and anorexia. The industry that had put her on a pedestal stepped over her sleeping bag without a second glance. For nearly a decade, she was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered about at parties she was no longer invited to. Her survival is nothing short of miraculous, a testament to an iron will that refused to be extinguished. When she finally returned with her album Broken English in 1979, her voice had dropped an octave, scarred by years of abuse and smoke, a haunting reminder of what she had endured. Marianne Faithfull was not just a victim of bad luck, she was a victim of a patriarchal system that used her youth and beauty to sell records and newspapers, only to discard her the moment she became damaged goods. She remains the ultimate symbol of the price women paid for the so-called liberation of the 60s, a revolution that was fun for the boys, but often fatal for the girls.